D. James Kennedy Ministries presents Truths That Transform.
Socialism is on the rise in America. Does it work? And perhaps more importantly, is socialism even biblical? On this program, we take a closer look.
One of the things that's really amazing in America today is that a United States Senator who is an out-and-out socialist is running for president on the Democrat Party ticket.
Socialism means we unite as one people and we decide on what we want to do.
I am upset with the direction that America is going because I came from the place where it didn't work, where America is trying to go now.
It's one thing for you to give out of compassion for someone who's less fortunate. It's an entirely different thing for the government to confiscate your property and give it to someone else.
Basically, we're robbing the productive people in our economy today to give money to people who are unproductive.
D. James Kennedy Ministries presents The Problem of Socialism, a revealing look at how the threat of ever-growing government endangers America.
For decades, the word socialism has been a dirty word in American politics, and rightly so. In the past, successfully identifying a program or idea with socialism would effectively kill it. But in recent years, that has all changed. Though it might have been unthinkable just 10 or 20 years ago, acceptance of socialism is on the rise in America.
Socialism, noun. Any of the various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods.
We must create an economy that works for all, not just the very wealthy.
Socialism is taking care of each other. That's the way I see it. We have to take care of each other. We haven't done that in a long time in this country.
Socialism is, in my definition, I would say people having what they need. People being able to live with dignity, knowing that they have what they need.
One of the things that's really amazing in America today is that a United States Senator who is an out-and-out socialist, he's not actually a Democrat, he is a socialist, is running for president on the Democrat Party ticket and proclaims his socialism. And the more amazing thing is it seems like the other candidate in the Democrat Party is now moving as close to his positions as possible without calling herself a socialist.
My view of democratic socialism builds on the success of many other countries around the world who have done a far better job than we have in protecting the needs of their working families, their elderly citizens, their children, their sick, and their poor.
We need to have economic democracy. The way that we are organized, it doesn't work for anybody. Or it works for some people. It works for something like the 1% of the 1%.
I think socialism means doing what's best as society for everyone. And I think that means working for the greater good.
But the tragedy is that you see these college students massing to his rallies and championing his ideas.
Greed is destroying our nation.
You wonder how these college students would respond if you went to them and said, you're an A student, but you know, there's an F student in your class, and so we're going to give you a C and give them a C. How do you like that? I don't think they would.
Many years ago, before he was a senator, Bernie Sanders said of his socialist views, quote, "I don't believe in charities," end quote. Instead, he advocated that government, not charity, should take over social programs.
Bernie Sanders is naive by saying that he's trying to get people to vote for him with the idea to implement socialism in America. Socialism doesn't work.
Natasha Srdoc grew up under socialism in Yugoslavia. She is now an American by choice.
And people need to know that it has been tried, it's a wonderful idea, but it doesn't work. In the end, actually socialism runs out of the money because it promises free education, free healthcare, free everything.
A free college would be a great start. 4-year universities should be free.
But somebody has to pay for it, and it cannot generate that kind of a growth that you can accumulate that kind of tax revenue that you can pay for everything and have economic growth. It doesn't work.
Socialism just says everyone's the same. Well, as you look at your neighborhood, you know everyone is not the same.
Socialism has kind of proved itself to be bankrupt, but it's not dying out in the intellectual world.
We need to be concerned about the ways in which socialist thinking is creeping into the general public and also into the churches.
There is a concern that socialism and the philosophy behind it is extending its tentacles into American life.
I believe in many of our government policies, unwittingly, the average American is allowing himself to be led by groups that have left leanings toward a manifestation of socialism.
Socialism is the government running the economy, the government guiding or owning resources in the economy, not people in the private markets. And government socialism manifestly does not work. If it did, the Soviet Union would have won the Cold War.
Socialism involves the government takeover of the means of production, but there can be degrees of freedom under such a system. Communism is socialism imposed by brutal force. But the overall goal of all socialism gets back to one thing: government control of private property. For example, Karl Marx wrote, "The theory of the communist may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property." And what happens when people are forced against their will to provide for the common pot in a collective scheme?
What you wind up with is forced collectivism. The collectivism can never be done voluntarily on a mass level. Maybe with some little small kibbutz in Israel, maybe with some little commune of hippies that are smoking dope out in Colorado somewhere, and they grow vegetables, it might work there. But on a mass of people, such as the third most populated nation in the world, the United States of America, how are you going to get everybody to voluntarily put all of their assets, all of their labors, all of their product into this great big pot for somebody to decide how much they get back? And the answer is, you're not going to get them to do that voluntarily. It's against human nature. It's against the laws of God. It's against how we were created by God. So your only solution then is to take it by force, and if they won't surrender, then to kill them. In the 20th century, more people died at the hands of their own atheist, socialist, Marxist governments than died in all the wars in all the history of mankind. We're talking millions of people were murdered by their own government simply because they would not accept the idea that everything that they produced should be surrendered to the state.
Yet socialism is taught in our schools at virtually every level, especially in the universities. Joshua Muravchik has written a definitive book on the history of the movement, Heaven on Earth: The Rise and Fall of Socialism.
If you go to universities any place in the world, including very much in the United States of America, which is not a very leftist country on the whole, but you'll find loads of professors, some who will call themselves Marxists, and others who will stop short of calling themselves Marxists, but will say Marx had wonderful insights that help us to interpret the world.
Now we've got, 21-year-old conservative evangelical Christians in Christian colleges that are thinking more or less like socialists. Now they're not secularists, but when it comes to basic economic understanding, their basic understanding of what economics is like, they think not only is it correct, they think that in fact the Christian worldview implies or requires socialism.
The founders had a vision for creating a United States of America, these United States of America. States created the federal government. The whole idea was to have it be limited, the national government be limited, and have many checks and balances. And their whole goal was to keep from amassing large centralized federal power. And to our detriment, many people today have forgotten the lessons of our founding fathers, who created a unique nation among all nations in the world.
The growing acceptance of socialism in America is not mere rhetoric. In reality, socialism, though few called it that, got a foothold in America back in the New Deal programs of the 1930s. And as you're about to see, in recent years, support for socialism has surged in America. Rarely is the term socialism actually applied, but socialistic government programs abound in our day.
We are ready to take this country in a fundamentally new direction. That's what's happening in America right now. Change is what's happening in America.
As he got closer to the White House, Barack Obama famously made this remark.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
Well, this administration believes that the function of government should be to redistribute income and not to create wealth, but to redistribute it. And, you know, think of countries that have become obsessed with redistributing income. Those are the poorest countries in the world.
Long before he ran for president, note what Barack Obama said on a Chicago radio station in 2001.
The Supreme Court never ventured into the issues of redistribution of wealth and sort of more basic issues of political and economic justice in the society. I'm not optimistic about bringing about major redistributive change through the courts. You know, the institution just isn't structured that way.
Critics would note that defining justice in terms of redistributing wealth is an idea imported from classic socialism. President Obama initiated almost $1 trillion in so-called stimulus spending that actually led to very few new jobs. The government took over General Motors and other struggling industries, and Obama promised to overhaul the healthcare system, about 1/6 of the nation's economy, with great assurances.
If you like your plan and you like your doctor, you won't have to do a thing. You keep your plan.
This is one of the worst laws that's ever been created and passed in American history. We can't afford $1 trillion of new entitlements, but more importantly, Obamacare is designed to have a government takeover of our healthcare system. And that is not just bad for our fiscal health, it's bad for our physical health. Do you want to have to go to a government-approved doctor, or do you want to go to the government every time you want a prescription drug or you want a new procedure? This is really scary stuff in terms of patients being able to make decisions about their own health care.
Furthermore, although Congress reformed welfare in the 1990s, slowly President Obama has begun to undo welfare reform, so much so that now 46 million Americans, or nearly 1 out of 6 of us, are on food stamps, and a record 94 million adult Americans are not in the workforce, many of whom wish to be working.
You've got a majority of Americans who are getting money from the government each month for their income. And then you've got only half of the Americans or less that are paying taxes. Once you hit that tipping point, then all of a sudden voters are going to say, yes, give us more and more and more government and tax that other guy. The other guy will pay all the bills. And, you know, there's an old saying that, democracies will perish when the population realizes they can just impose higher and higher taxes on the other people.
These massive government programs cost enormous amounts of money to a nation with a nearly $20 trillion national debt. Yet many people justify them in the name of social justice, as if it's the Christian thing to do.
Basically, we're robbing the productive people in our economy today to give money to people who are unproductive. The people who are going to bear the burden of our enormous overspending are our children, grandchildren, our grandchildren's children. I don't think it's Christian to pass on these enormous millstones of debt onto the necks of our children.
We are leaving to our children and grandchildren and our grandchildren's children the biggest debt burden in the history of America.
As we've seen, socialistic programs have proliferated in recent years, and there's a growing acceptance of socialism even by that name among younger generations in America. But there's a more important, more fundamental issue at stake than socialism's mere popularity. Is socialism a good economic system based on reality as God made it? Or to put it another way, does the Bible teach socialism?
One of the great clashes in the modern world is between two mutually exclusive systems, socialism and free enterprise, sometimes called capitalism. Advocates of socialism claim that it is the most effective and compassionate system for taking care of people, even that it embodies the core principles of Christianity.
Cristo era comunista, más incluso que socialista.
So frankly, socialism has the best branding, and it appeals to quite legitimate moral intuitions that Christians have.
By contrast, the free enterprise system is portrayed as cold and greed-driven, carelessly leaving disadvantaged people in its wake. But is this true? What does the Bible really say about it?
I don't believe that the Bible teaches socialism. I think that that is a mental construct that folks have tried to superimpose on the Bible.
The Bible teaches private property. The Bible teaches that we are to care for our neighbor. Socialism won't work because socialism is based upon the assumption that man is basically neutral or good.
We are fallen beings and corrupt beings, and therefore you can't redeem the world through human agency. But everybody on the left actually believes that it's social institutions that are the problem, not people. It's capitalism that divides them. Private property makes them racists and exploiters. Nonsense. People do that.
One of the key economic principles of the Bible is that one is expected to earn one's keep. The Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Thessalonica, where some were lazing around waiting for the second coming, "For even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat." But for those who are unable to work or who are experiencing a particularly difficult time, such as widows and orphans, the Bible certainly teaches charity. In fact, historically, it was the Christian faith that unlocked the forces of charity. It was Jesus Christ who taught the parable of the Good Samaritan, and he told his followers to go and do likewise.
If you go back and look at who is helping the poor right now in America, it is evangelical Christians who, out of the largesse and generosity of their heart, are giving both domestically and internationally to home and foreign missions.
The Bible teaches charity, and that's freely giving to those who have a need. But socialism is forcibly taking from one person and giving to another, and it's the government or the authorities that are doing it. And that's stealing. And the politicians that promote socialism do it as if they're the ones being kind. But really, they're spending other people's money in their kindness.
At the heart of the matter is the fact that every dollar the government gives to one person is a dollar it, having no money of its own, has taken from someone else by force of law. But the Ten Commandments gives us a clear declaration from God on this topic. You shall not steal.
2 of the 10 Commandments presuppose the legitimacy of private property. Do not steal. That implies that people have some property that legitimately belongs to them and that it's wrong to coercively take it from them. Do not covet your neighbor's wife or his possessions. That implies that there are certain things within the individual domain that we justly have the right to.
One of the major problems of socialism is it's based on covetousness. When you hear a politician promoting a policy that's a socialist policy, the way he sells it is by saying, the wealthy have something that you ought to have. We should take from the wealthy to give to you. And he's tapping into the voters or the listeners' sense of greed or covetousness, that I want what someone else has. And rather than working for it, I want it taken from them and given to me.
The Bible does call for Christians to pay their taxes to the government, and some level of taxation for the common good is expected. Still, despite these moral problems with government confiscation and redistribution of wealth, many advocates of socialism have pointed to the Bible for justification. One such passage is Acts 2, where the early Christians shared their property. Some have said this was a primitive form of communism. It says, "Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and divided them among all, as anyone had need."
This is nowhere held up in Scripture or Christian tradition as the universal model for Christians.
This is not communism. This is not socialism. This is Christianity. This is caring for one another. And it's not the government controlling it. It is the Spirit of God within me, directing me to be led of God's Spirit to help the body of Christ, and not only to help the body of Christ, but to help others.
A few chapters later, in Acts 5, there's an incident where a couple, Ananias and Sapphira, sell their house and give most of the proceeds to the church. They come under the judgment of God, however, after holding back a portion for themselves. Some socialists have claimed that this judgment is a repudiation of private property, but a close reading of the text shows the opposite is the case. But Peter said, "Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? You have not lied to men, but to God." What's more, classic socialism and its offspring communism are based on a view of the universe that excludes God.
These are two completely different worldviews. This is why, simply on logical grounds, it's impossible to be both an Orthodox Christian and an Orthodox Marxist. You're either going to be very confused or you're going to be one or the other.
Socialism is an idea that keeps people in poverty, and it's very destructive to societies and to families. And it's not a biblical concept.
Though the Bible clearly does not teach socialism, millions believe that it does. That's the view many well-meaning, eager young Christians pick up at college, or perhaps from an idealistic but misled youth group. Today, Jay Richards is an accomplished economist, philosopher, and author with a biblical worldview. But at one time, as a young Christian, Jay was drawn into the false worldview of socialism, believing it to be biblical.
I grew up in a medium-sized city in Texas, more or less as a kind of conventional mainline Christian, but got off to college, a very liberal arts college in South Texas, and immediately fell in with socialist and Marxist thinking. In fact, my very first course in political science, I had to read the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels, and a book called Democracy for the Few by an American socialist named Michael Parente. I read Parente's book about 5 times that semester, and read the Communist Manifesto I don't know how many times. So by the end of the semester, I was more or less thinking in Marxist categories, and frankly, for a couple of years, thought as a socialist. But I was also, at least at the time, more or less a Christian, and thought a lot of this stuff actually resonates with the Christian worldview. Jesus, on the other hand, talked about the poor, he talked about justice and all these things, and that's exactly what the socialists were talking about. So it's very easy for, in a freshman mind who's not thinking clearly about economics, to suddenly find that the socialist vision, even the Marxist vision, sort of shorn of its atheism, somehow compatible with or even implied by the Christian worldview. What really happened in my case is I kept reading economics. So that by my senior year in college, I realized, communism and collectivism, they don't work economically, but there's something morally wrong with it. It's still more or less based on greed. It wasn't until I was actually in theological seminary and started reading some books by a guy named George Gilder and another one named Michael Novak that I realized that, in fact, that caricature of capitalism is just that. It's a caricature. Capitalism is not based on greed. Rather, it channels greed, which is exactly what you would want of an economic system in a fallen world. The fruits of socialism couldn't be worse. In fact, there's no political ideology that's ever killed more people than the socialist experiment. And so, from a Christian perspective, just from a generically moral perspective, the idea that socialism ought to have some kind of promise for redeeming human beings or for helping us, it's absurd. Just look at the record.
As you've seen on today's program, socialism is an ideology born of atheism and fostered by a false worldview that sees man as perfectible and a utopian society as something achievable. But the inevitable result of socialism is tyranny. And yet the lure of socialism proves appealing to a new generation ignorant of its claims and results. That's why it has never been more important for Americans to understand the threat of socialism. And we have 2 new resources to help you with that. Here's my very good friend, Jennifer Kennedy Cassidy, to tell us more about that. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, Frank. The statistics are frightening. A recent survey showed that a significant number of Americans under 30 preferred socialism to capitalism. 43% of them said they had a favorable view of socialism. Acceptance of socialism is on the rise among a generation that has little memory of the 20th century. A socialist candidate for president made a serious run in 2016, and it's only a matter of a few years before one is elected at the current rate. This simply cannot happen. This sort of ignorance of the biblical and economic realities is a danger to us all. That's why we want to send you a DVD copy of today's special program, The Problem of Socialism, with extra bonus content not seen in today's broadcast, as our thanks for your generous donation to the ongoing work of this ministry. We need your help to broadcast programs like this, sounding the warning far and wide. And we want you to have a copy of this program to share with your children, grandchildren, a college student you may know, or anyone else who needs to hear the truth about socialism. Simply write to us at Box 6085, Albert Lea, Minnesota, 56007, or call toll-free 888-334-9762, or go online to djameskennedy.org. And we have an additional resource you won't want to miss. It's the book 10 Truths About Socialism, and it's also available as our thanks for your generous donation. This easy-to-understand book is packed with information dealing with facts about socialism that everyone needs to know. Did you know that socialism is at war with the family and the church? That its founding architects rejected God? That socialism and tyranny go hand in hand? Those truths and many others, much like the ones you've seen today, can be found in 10 Truths About Socialism. That's the DVD special program, The Problem of Socialism, and the essential book, 10 Truths About Socialism, each available as our thanks for your generous donation. Please contact us right away with your gift so that we can continue to produce and air vital programs on hot-button issues from a biblical perspective. Simply write to us at Box 6085, Albert Lea, Minnesota, 56007, or call toll-free 888-334-9762, or go online to djameskennedy.org.
In this program, you've witnessed firsthand the danger of socialism and seen how quickly it's demolished by a biblical understanding. Any system that tries to dethrone God and undermine the biblical truth about mankind is destined to fail. May our nation learn these lessons now before we go any further down the path leading to the end of faith and freedom. Thank you for watching. May God bless you, and may God bless America.
This has been a production of D. James Kennedy Ministries.